All right. Here we are, guys. So let's see. I'm going live by myself because I was all prepared to go live with my discussion with Ned Block. And unfortunately, we had some cross communication errors occurred, and he needed to cancel at the last minute. Apparently, he sent me an email a couple days ago. I never received it for personal reasons. And that kind of stuff happens. So I will try to reschedule that discussion. It's unfortunate, but what are you going to do? So, um, nonetheless, though, here I am. And I was all prepared to go and have a discussion about consciousness and whatnot. Let's see if I can get rid of that over there. Um, so I was all prepared for that. So I figured I would just start streaming and see who's around and what they may talk about. Um, so, if anybody's out there and you are prepared to talk about consciousness, then please drop on by. Once again, unfortunately, I had to reschedule the discussion with Ned Block because he had to cancel because of personal issues. And while I'm deeply saddened, we'll try to get that rescheduled. I don't know. He's a slippery guy. I'm trying to get him on for a long time. But I do hope everything works out and that nothing too serious is going on over there. Hey, Johannes, how's it going? By the way, for anyone who would like to come and chat with me, you can, oops, um, use this link and go ahead and come on and say hello. We could chat about some stuff. Oops. Okay. Yeah. All right. All the streaming stuff seems to be working appropriately. Yeah, good to hear that things are going well. Um, Man, I've been preparing for this thing for a while now, so I'm all oh great, yeah. I'm all pumped up, ready to talk about some block. I will say I've been reading this book of his, The Border Between Seeing and Thinking. I think I've read it 3 times at this point. Every time you read it, there's something new in there. I've reread some sections multiple times. I will just say it's, I think, probably one of the best philosophy books that's come out recently. Extremely detailed, empirically oriented, full of arguments everywhere that you turn. Um, Something interesting is going on. Even if you don't agree with everything that he says, I highly recommend the book, The Border Between Seeing and Thinking. Obviously, Block's been around for a while. He's hugely influential, but this is the first book that he's actually written. He has a couple of edited collections of books, edited collection of his papers. This anthology on consciousness and mental imagery, I think, was someone from way back when. So it's somewhat surprising that someone who's kind of late into their career writes their first book, especially someone who's already really influential in that way. So that's very cool, and the book is everything you would expect it's to be. It's well worth paying serious attention to. I'm hoping to teach a class on it at the Graduate Center. We'll see if that pans out. Um, these things have a way of sometimes panning out or sometimes not. So or is that just for me? But I am hoping to teach a class on it in the cognitive neuroscience program, maybe cross-listed with philosophy, possibly co-taught with Eric Mandelbaum. Nothing is set in stone, but I am hoping to do that. I think it's well worth knowing. Such a great bringing together of philosophy and neuroscience and cognitive science, generally speaking. So super cool. And I'll also just say that it was been really cool to see Ned's work go from real far out thought experiments. If you read his earlier stuff, Inverted Earth and the Chinese Nation, all these things that were super like conceptual analysis, a priori type stuff, to the more hardcore empirically grounded stuff, which I just tremendously respect. So one hopes that I can get this rescheduled at some point, um, and that we can have that discussion uh, someday. Hello, Johannes.
Hey there, how's it
Hey, what's
going?
up?
It's a pity that Ned couldn't make it. Yeah, was really interested about the discussion.
Yeah, I'm hoping I
Yeah,
can
so
make it
it's,
happen someday. We'll see.
it would be super cool. Yeah, is he okay?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, they're getting ready to take a trip, and Susan's sick, so they're just like frazzled.
Yeah, I see. Okay, yeah, I still have my teaching background from before Christmas.
The cabin in the
Yeah,
snow.
yeah. It's my dream, this Kevin like this. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So did you have any specific topics you wanted to cover with Ned?
Yeah, I was going to well talk about generally consciousness physicalism. That's kind of what's my plan on starting. I never write out questions or anything in advance. I kind of just follow the
Yeah,
discussion, but I definitely wanted to ask him
yeah.
about Chalmers' argument for silicon replacements. That's kind of what's going to be my focus at the start. And then all the stuff about perception that he's been talking about.
Mm,
I was kind of confused about some of the stuff he said about categorical representation, whether
mm,
that is conceptual or proto-conceptual, and what the distinction between concepts and proto concepts were. So yeah, that was the kind of stuff that was gonna.
mm. Oh,
Plus
super
some of the
interesting. Yeah.
objections from Jacob Beck and Jake Pulte Dunn and those kind of guys. That there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah. That sounds amazing. I'm really into the his recent talks about, like, do we need meat? He has a good way of putting that I have in my mind right now. But basically these ideas to go beyond functionalism maybe in some sense. Don't know what you think about them.
Which ideas to go beyond functionalism?
I think Ned's ideas. I think I heard two talks of his. One of them, I don't remember where exactly. I think one of them was in New York, but one of them was maybe at ACC or something.
Uh-huh.
They were really good. I mean, I'm probably confusing things a lot, but like it seemed to me that somehow the idea is okay. Maybe this is a total. I'm not sure if that's warranted to say this, but it seemed to me that there's a general search going on right now for like sort of a theory that could be go beyond functionalism,
Uh-huh.
but somehow try to to put the light of consciousness on biological organisms alone, something you somehow couldn't do in an AI.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Anil has this great paper about it. I think he calls it biological naturalism. And I felt that, yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
I
that's
felt
an
that,
area that we
yeah,
have a lot of overlap. So that's probably my last prejudice holdover from when I was young is the idea that consciousness is probably a biological function and a kind of anti-functionalism about in
but
general. I've kind of softened towards
yeah,
functionalism as I've gotten
yeah,
older, but I still find it
yeah,
very counterintuitive and um, especially with respect to
but it,
consciousness. So I've always been
right,
a biological naturalist. I mean, back in the old days, it was
yeah,
Searle who was
yeah,
kind of trying to carve that
yeah,
lane, but Searle, it's never clear if he
yeah,
was a property
yeah,
dualist or what his actual views were.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
so the identity theory just says, consciousness is something biological. I have my own kind of response to. I think really there's only two serious arguments for the functionalist view. One is that well, science kind of just works that way, that it where it looks for mechanisms, functions, and so forth and so on. And the other is Chalmers's argument that you could have, if you gradually replace the brain with silicon chips, that you would
mm,
end up with something that
yeah,
was functionally isomorphic, and then our best
yeah,
bet would be treated as though it's conscious. And I think
yeah,
there's empirical reasons to doubt that kind of argument.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
But I'm just curious. I'm not sure that if so. Just a second ago, when you first started talking, so you talked about biological functions. I'm not sure whether this was. But so what my question is, like, as soon as you have a biological function, it seems by the very nature of a function, an AI system could just have it too. I
Uh-huh.
mean, like, what's a function that you couldn't run on an AI system if it's really about function?
Yeah. So that's a complicated issue, but so biological functions aren't necessarily computational functions. Those are two distinct notions of functions. Computational functions are more mathematically defined. Um,
So
So
what would be an example of
I
like a
mean,
biological
I
function?
think one example that Ned actually uses
Mm,
in his work, which I think is good,
mm,
is the nervous system of the worm C. elegans. So in
mm,
that worm, there is a particular
mm,
neural pathway which it uses for
mm,
two things. One is for threat detection, the other is for proprioception. And the threat detection bit depends on neural firing, action potentials, and so forth and so on.
mm,
But the proprioception bit depends on a specific chemical being synthesized
mm,
and acting as a
mm,
second messenger, basically. And so it's
mm,
not clear whether if you simulated that particular chemical structure, whether it would do the same thing or not. Sort of
mm.
on, it's an open
But
question. So I
yeah,
mean, it's not
I
clear.
yeah. So I think I get that part, but I think like if you specify that it's got to be a chemical, you're saying something extra functional, right?
Yes, exactly.
Independently of like yeah. So the question is like,
But
is it
functional in the
something
sense
that
of like machine functionalism or computational
oh,
functionalism.
I see. Yeah. So I think in a sense, like the whole of neuroscience is like, I mean, okay, this is a super gross generalization, but like it's somehow looking at the world through computational glasses
Yeah.
somehow, information theoretic. So it seems like whatever we find out, if we do neuroscience in like in the proper sense, it's gonna be something that's gonna be spelled out in terms of information flow or computational architecture.
Hmm.
So that's something you could always run on the eye. It seems like maybe so. It's just like so. What I'm wondering is like, and I think Anil goes somewhere. I mean, I wouldn't be able to summarize it, but I think there's this search going on whether we can say something that's except other than like it's this and this material.
Right.
Other than that, whether we can say something that's really like that's something which you couldn't run on where it's not sufficient to have control over information flow or computational states or something.
Right, exactly. Or,
So
but even
yeah,
more fine
yeah,
grained than that is whether, if you could, whether it would produce the same result. So no
yeah,
one's saying, I mean, so
yeah,
suppose it's
yeah,
possible to computationally
yeah,
model this
yeah,
particular
yeah,
molecule. The question
yeah,
is whether doing
yeah,
so would have the same function, sorry, not
yeah,
the same function,
yeah,
the same
yeah.
effect.
The same result, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But some like in physics, like when we disregard gravity in physics, we have this unified theory of electromagnetic, the electroweak theory,
Right.
basically. So you have my physics is a bit rusty, but so in a certain sense, it's not that these things are like different things, really. I mean, there's like just there's this one quantum field, right?
Right.
And it doesn't matter so much whether you're silicon or whether you're carbon, right? It's just a different conjugation of this one. I'm not trying to be esoteric. I'm just saying like one-on-one sort of physics.
Yeah.
So even in physics, it's like if you want to do like this, I mean, maybe that's a stupid thought, and probably someone's going to correct me or something, but like it's not so clear how you actually distinguish, like if you're trying to be very very fundamental, this configuration from that configuration of the quantum field.
Yeah, that's kind of
So,
what I meant
well,
or was alluding to when I
yeah,
said that one of
yeah,
the objections, this is how science works,
yeah,
because it generally
yeah,
does
yeah,
work in this
yeah,
way. But at the same time, we
yeah,
can still distinguish gold
yeah.
from lead, and the difference between
Yeah,
them
yeah, yeah,
is
yeah,
something in their
yeah.
constitution. I mean,
That's
something
true.
in their
Yeah,
makeup.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
could something could be the same case, similar could be the
yeah,
case with respect to consciousness.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it is I mean, I
So,
will just say that it
yeah,
is very
yeah,
suspicious that the brain uses this kind of two-stage model
hmm,
going from
yeah,
electrical
yeah,
activity to chemical neurotransmission. And if you
yeah,
look at the
yeah,
history of this, people were very baffled by this.
yeah,
People
yeah,
didn't believe that synapses were a real
yeah,
thing in the 20s and 30s, and even up
yeah,
until like I'd say the 50s or 60s, people were still some.
yeah,
I shouldn't say people. Some prominent
yeah.
neuroscientists were still very skeptical that chemical
Oh,
transmission
really?
was
Yeah,
really an important aspect of neural
yeah,
functioning,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it just seems very weird that you would have this
yeah,
very quick
yeah,
thing, action potentials, and then this
yeah,
very
yeah,
slow
yeah,
thing, chemical diffusion.
yeah, yeah,
So it does seem as though
yeah.
maybe it's that way for a reason. I mean, so it's
Mm. But I mean, it could be just an evolutionary reason, right? Maybe it's better to build, or maybe it's like it has some other advantage.
yeah, it certainly
Yeah,
could be,
yeah, yeah,
but it also
yeah,
could be the case that there's something specific. I mean,
yeah,
so on a view
yeah.
like the biological naturalist view, then consciousness has a specific adaptive function to it, because pain is
Mm-hmm,
very good for getting us to avoid certain stimuli and to favor
mm-hmm,
injured body
mm-hmm,
parts and so forth and so on. If pain is that biological state, then of course
mm-hmm,
evolution would be favoring favoring that thing. And so, yes, maybe
mm,
there's an evolutionary
mm,
reason that this kind of process was picked
mm,
out, namely that it
mm.
produces these kinds of
Yeah,
states that you can't get in a different
yeah.
way.
But just to understand, like when you, I mean, I'm not trying to be critical. It's just
No,
to
that's fine.
understand.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so when you say biological naturalism, for example, like I mean, the point, like it presumes that we know what the distinction is between biology and silicon, right?
Yeah,
Like it presumes
exactly.
this, but it doesn't give the distinction. It doesn't say that here's, mm, yeah. Really, I feel that, like I feel that maybe so a really satisfying account of what of how to account for something like in a truly like non-functional way would be like a major step as important as like from identity theory to functionalism.
Yeah,
And sometimes I wonder whether, given that we're in the age of information, I mean, to a certain extent that's all we have, whether it's really whether we can do this. Like
I
for
agree.
example, yeah, yeah,
And I don't even
I,
think that Ned is like fully
yeah,
committed to this view, although it's
yeah,
unclear. That's what's one thing I was going to try to figure out
yeah,
was how
yeah,
committed he is to
yeah,
this.
yeah,
And like I said, this is
yeah,
probably, I mean, that's
yeah,
why I use the word prejudice when I first,
yeah,
because this may
yeah.
be just a prejudice. Namely, I'm
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
disposed to thinking biology is cool because I'm
yeah,
biological.
yeah,
But I think it could be more than that. And I don't think we have
yeah,
any real
yeah,
principled reasons for thinking
yeah,
that it's not that way.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's especially when you think
yeah,
about, well, there's a lot of advances in the sciences which look as though they're honing in
mm,
on some kind of distinctive biological thing. And
yeah,
by biological, we could just mean that something that
yeah,
depends on the chemical constituents of the makeup of
mm,
an organism. So
mm,
something
mm,
structural.
mm, yeah. Super interesting. Yeah, that's structural is a good point. Yeah. Do you think that there's a difference like in like would you say the difference is in structure
Yeah,
ultimately?
absolutely.
Because then, for example, like when people talk about these causal structure theories of consciousness, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't really know where ultimately the difference lies, you know? So the only difference I understand personally, but I'm asking this as a question, maybe you can help me. So I understand there's so like if we do science at all, we describe things as dynamical systems, in natural science.
hmm
And the dynamics might be picked out by like super fancy mathematical laws in foundational physics or very, very general laws or maybe just rules in like higher sciences in a sense. But we're always just doing like somehow we're talking about the dynamics of stuff. And then I do understand that there's a distinction now if we go to computer science, if we do like computation, if we talk about stuff that's a computation, there's more assumptions. Like for example, the dynamics have to be Markov, like
right,
according to Turing, I believe. And there's a few more formal assumptions, like the formal assumption that goes into like the Turing machine, formally specified. Those are like substantive assumptions. Not any dynamical system satisfies
right.
these. So that's a distinction I understand. But other than that distinction, it seems to me like this. I mean, so sorry, this is I should be this is forever online, so I should be a little bit more careful in the bullshit I tell. But this is just a thought. So what I'm saying is like if you think about, for example, IIT, which is the typical causal structure theory.
Yeah,
Well, the input is just some systems in some configuration with some dynamics. So it's not so different from like I mean, the only difference to functionalism is that in functionalism you would sort of say what the identity conditions are for states of consciousness
right.
somehow, but
I mean, I
there's not
talked to
this to me
Christoph
that
about this
yeah,
exact point.
yeah. What did he say? Yeah,
Um, he
yeah,
just said that a simulation of IIT wouldn't be integrated. So if you
yeah, yeah,
simulate it, and I
yeah,
was like, but why not?
yeah,
Because in the
yeah,
simulated
yeah,
thing, so the
yeah,
structure underneath it, the
yeah,
computer maybe doesn't have
yeah,
that causal
yeah,
structure, but the thing
yeah,
you're
yeah.
simulating does. So
That's true. Yeah,
it
yeah,
doesn't seem to
yeah.
me to
There's
be any different. He
yeah,
was like, no, it
yeah,
is. And I was like, but why?
yeah,
We kind of went around that for a while, but I don't really know
yeah,
what it is. That's
yeah,
why I think it would have to be something in the structure that I mean. So
yeah,
someone like me is not going to say you could never build a conscious
yeah,
machine. You would
yeah,
because the brain is a
yeah,
kind of machine. It's a mechanism
yeah,
of some sort.
yeah, yeah,
But the question is whether the kind of mechanism or machine that's required is one that kind of works in the way that the computers that we have designed up till now work.
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
really is the question, and it just
yeah,
doesn't seem to me
yeah,
clear that the answer is yes. Namely, in terms of the
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
input, the kind of representational content, and the transformations over
yeah,
it that
yeah,
provide an output.
yeah,
Whether you can,
yeah,
whether that's enough for consciousness, seems to me to be
yeah, yeah.
an open
No,
question.
I mean, I must say I don't really have an intuition, or like I'm just interested in how you could form, like which sort of theory would be in principle not which sort of theory would in principle disallow computers or artificial systems to be conscious,
Yeah.
other than a theory that literally says it's this stuff. Like what would be the sort of language that we would even have to use other than pointing at like presupposed distinctions like biological and artificial. Yeah, that's something I find like I don't my own. So I have sort of this tiny side project with one with Tim Ludwig, one without it, where somehow we show that under funny circumstances, you get conclusion that, by funny I mean rather general circumstances,
Hmm.
which you wouldn't expect, you get conclusions that AI systems can be conscious, current AI systems.
Mm.
But I don't really, this is not like a personal, like it's not because I have the intuition that they aren't. It's just, I kind of find it funny that you have these things. So, for example, you can show that under a very extremely weak assumption, if you presuppose the notion of functionalism that Putnam originally proposed, in the exact form in which he proposed it with probabilistic automata, you can make extremely weak assumptions to show that consciousness cannot be a Turing computation.
Hmm.
So this is, I find this funny, but I don't really have it's not that I have intuition or want something. It's just, yeah,
Yeah, you just find it interesting.
yeah,
I mean, I guess
yeah,
I've
yeah.
always, someone in the chat is mentioning the Chinese room from Searle, and I guess I've always sort of found that kind of, I'll call it an
Mm-hmm,
argument,
mm-hmm,
convincing, but I don't think it really
mm-hmm,
proves anything. It's just kind of an intuition
mm-hmm,
pump. But I've always, so I do have the intuition that, yeah,
mm-hmm,
something that was merely syntactically defined, transformations over
mm-hmm,
syntactically defined
mm-hmm.
representations or
Mm,
states isn't going to be enough
mm.
to give you an understanding or consciousness or whatever
But
it
in
is that.
how, yeah, yeah.
But how
So,
what?
but in how far are you not just syntactically defined? Like, in how far, I mean, like, all I understand about your brain when I look at neuroscience
Uh-huh.
is just, is also just syntax, except if, I decide what meaning is in your brain. And you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Well, what do you mean by syntax?
So for me, syntax is really just like there's a formal description of the system.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I don't want to be too realist, but I think I'm sort of a little bit of secret realist, scientific realist.
Okay.
But to a certain extent, there's something out there, and we can describe it damn well in terms of like a formal system. Period.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's all. That's all. I think if you take physics as it stands, that you can always wiggle the interpretation. That's basically what physics somehow tells us.
Right.
There's something, or I shouldn't be careful. It doesn't tell us. Like you have to. It tells. That's what physics tells someone who's a scientific realist. Yeah, there is the universe and whatnot, and we have formal theories, and we can use them pretty well to describe it and to some extent. I mean, we're not physics is like a Swiss cheese. There's holes everywhere, but I mean, generally speaking. So, like, and how far is that? The only difference is if I can take the same statement and apply it to your brain
Hmm.
or to an AI system. The only difference is that if I apply the statement to the AI systems, a few more assumptions are true, which aren't true for physics in general. The typical Turing machine assumption, or these good recursive functions, or like sort of assumptions that have to do with a specific kind of thing that computation is.
Right.
But other than that, yeah, I'm curious if anyone, yeah,
I mean, it seems to me
hasn't,
that
yeah,
that's probably why starting at the fundamental physics level is a bad idea for thinking about consciousness. Because
absolutely, yeah, I get that, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But I didn't mean start about. I didn't want to say that we should start with physics. I just wanted to say, like, if you look at the general thing that we can do in science, right?
Yeah.
Like it seems to be in all instances, it seems to be there's these somehow. I mean, I don't want to say everything is formula or math, but in almost all sciences, you can take the results that are being studied. Like let's say, for example, in evolution, you can take like evolution in game theory or whatnot, and
Hmm.
you have and that's just because science is inherently logical. So you can basically cook down the sort of models that we have to some sort of proto-formal or pseudo-formal account, and then that works reasonably well. And I'm just saying this. I don't want to say we should start with foundations of physics. I really just want to say that it's if you look through this lens, or if you look at it in this way, it's not so easy to see the distinctions. That's if you're doing science. Of course, we should do metaphysics, and we should have argument about, like what's the right metaphysical interpretation and
Right,
whatnot. And
exactly. But it just, I
yeah,
mean, the point I was making, it depends on what science you're
yeah,
doing. So
yeah,
that's if you're doing cellular neurophysiology, then it doesn't quite look that way. There's lots of things
Mm-hmm.
that you're describing that don't seem to be purely formal, that don't seem to be captured in terms of something purely
Mm-hmm.
formal. I mean,
Maybe,
if you're
yeah,
doing
yeah,
electrophysiology, what matters is, how many
yeah,
calcium ions and how many sodium ions. And yeah, you could model those with an equation,
yeah,
and we have
yeah,
tried to do that.
yeah,
But the question is whether the formal model captures everything that's there physically in the system, and it's not clear that that is what's going on.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I would, my honest opinion is like if you can say something meaningful, you can also say formally, but it doesn't mean that you have to. You don't have to. Maybe it has a disadvantage. I
Yeah,
think, like in consciousness science, for example, if you apply formalism too early, you hinder yourself because you're forcing yourself to too much concreteness,
hmm
and that's maybe not good in certain instances. But I'm really just asking sort of like independently how you put it, like where's the meaning in your brain that can't be in an AI. Like what do we even? And I do understand that you can be like if we're metaphysical, if we're discussing metaphysics, or maybe there are good ideas out there what meaning could be that would be such that. But if I look at your brain from the perspective of neuroscience, I didn't see the big difference.
So do you think it's established at this point that the brain is a computer?
No, no, I think it's like the working hypothesis of
Yeah.
of neuroscience right now.
Uh,
Maybe not that it's a computer, it's not probably not Turing computation,
but
but
it's
like
information
it's the
processing.
information flow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's I think that's the working hypothesis. And the question is like, I mean, maybe in 100 years, I mean, if you the information technology is like 80 years old, right? Shannon's famous paper maybe was 42 or 43 or something.
Yeah.
So maybe in 100 years we have a whole new age where we like have new concepts that we can apply and we understand how they're just the concept of
Exactly.
information
So, and
are
in the
just like one
history of
perspective.
in the
Yeah,
history of this, that's exactly what we find. So, if you look back,
yeah,
to the first
yeah,
century AD, people were talking about the brain as a hydraulic system, and the
yeah, yeah.
fluids in the
So funny.
ventricles that would last for a
Yeah,
thousand years.
yeah, yeah,
So, there's that old joke
yeah,
about looking for our keys where the light is, as opposed to where we may find it. And right now, the light happens to
yeah,
be where
yeah,
computational theories,
yeah,
we understand
yeah.
computation fairly
That
well.
yeah, yeah,
But it's not 100. I mean, I don't think that we know that the
yeah.
brain is an information processing system. Whether it does process information, I think, yeah, probably it does. But whether that's
Mm.
all that it does, or that everything that it does can be described by the formal system of information theory, I think is a completely
Mm.
open question at this
No,
point.
yeah, I fully agree. Yeah, I think the interesting question would be like, how can we proceed if we like what scientifically if we don't think it is the case? And I love consciousness for precisely this reason, right?
hmm
It's the problem of consciousness is the problem where you one of the key points where you get to ask these questions and think about like yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
pity. It's a pity Anil isn't here. I mean, I would love to talk to him too about. I didn't know you had a sympathy for biological naturalism.
Yes.
Um, how does it square with your higher order um, convictions?
Well, I wouldn't call them convictions, first of all.
No, sorry, I'm struggling with English again.
No,
Yeah,
no,
interest.
but I mean, so
Yeah.
I'm not really a true convert of higher order theory.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting, and I think that as usually construed, it's a functionalist theory. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we really know what a thought is. So thoughts could be
Mm-hmm.
something biological,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
representations, generally speaking, of the right kind, whether they're thoughts
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, could be something
Mm-hmm.
biological. So it may be the
Mm-hmm.
case that there's a higher order representation, and that it is necessarily
Yeah.
biological, such that the same kind of representation formally described wouldn't do the same sort of work that the biological thing does. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it could be the case that even that kind of theory could fit with sort of the
Mm-hmm.
biological naturalist stuff. On the other, so the final level of analysis would be in terms of the biological properties, and then you would say tell a story about how they instantiate representations, and then how the representations have their content, and so on, and build up from there.
Mm-hmm.
On the other
Mm-hmm.
hand, I think that um, I'm not entirely closed off to functionalism. I used to have a sort of death first attitude towards functionalism, but now I sort of think, okay, so maybe death is worse. But so I'm not super against functionalism as much as I used to be in my youth, as I said. Um,
Why have you been why have you been so much against it, or why are you still where does it come from?
I think from just intuitive notions. So that's what kind of backs
Mm-hmm.
me away from it is that when I think about the Chinese room experiment, thought experiments, the Chinese nation, even going back further, back to Block, that those kinds of things, it just struck me as sort of extremely counterintuitive that they could be conscious. But I just came to distrust those kinds of intuitions.
I see.
And the kind of arguments for the preservation of consciousness as you switch out the computational things, I always just kind of thought, well, gee, we have empirical reasons to think that that's not really what's going to happen. So, and then Chalmers himself at one point even said, well, change blindness has got him to rethink his, dancing qualia argument. And I was like, well, we have other things that do the same thing with respect to the fading qualia argument. So I think that intuitions just, are ultimately disguised theoretical assumptions on your part. So I just can't take them as seriously as I used to when I was younger. And I used to think, well, it's just intuitively obvious that consciousness has got to be something biological and couldn't be realized. And now I just don't think that's a very good form of argument. I think that those things are good intuition pumps to see where you're kind of naturally lie, but I don't want to say they can refute a theory or that we should be taking them too seriously. Yeah, so that's what did it. And then, of course, obviously, the success of things like ChatGPT and so forth show that there's something in this area that's worth taking seriously. So that these systems that we have are very impressive, and I don't think we can discount that.
I think maybe I'm just not so far. So for me, like I'm usually I just struggle with understanding, like even with functionalism, for example. I mean, if you look at if you take the very old definition by Putnam, which is basically saying, so the requirement is basically there is a probabilistic automaton description of a system, which basically just means a description. You have a graph, you have a graph, and then you have the nodes of the graphs are states, and the edges are like where the states could go to, and they have probabilities. And then then there are a few other requirements, like in terms of, I forgot the details, but there's like a requirement that you make sure that if the individual bees are conscious, it doesn't follow that the bee swarm is conscious. So it's not put like this, but a little bit like some sort of reducibility requirements. Not much, it's like three or four requirements. But I struggle even with, like when you say, so a probabilistic automaton, he literally uses the word description. But there's like infinitely many descriptions of every single system in every time range. Like it depends. Like if I include one photon in your retina, I have another description. It's different. If I, there's so many, and then there's so many, like, I think that, so I usually struggle with the basics even, like, what is, like, how do we make sense of this in terms of these infinite many descriptions that exist and stuff like this? So, hopefully I get to the more intuitive point of it.
Do you think, so are you saying that it's hard to understand what would even count as a system implementing one kind of machine table versus another?
No, I'm basically saying, like, if I take you as a system, like anything, like my laptop even right now, what I'm saying is, like, we can describe this on so many different levels, and every level would have a different machine table. And then for every single level, we can still decide make so many different choices what counts as input. Yeah. Like, is the atom of my finger part of the input or just a button press?
Right.
And there's so many. I mean, I had a quick time where I thought the definition that Putnam gave for functionalism was empty because you could always construct one description that satisfies the requirement. That's not the case, but it's just closely not the case because there's so many choices you have. It's not that Mother Nature comes around and tells you this is supposed to be the input and that's supposed to be the output.
Right.
And that's the right course grading.
Exactly. I see what you're saying now. Yeah. Exactly. So it's more a matter of what level you want to start at and how you define these things that seem so easy to say, like, oh, the input, the output, okay, but. Yeah, exactly. I think we face the same thing with respect to the brain. So this is a debate that's longstanding about what the right level of analysis of that is. Do we have to go all the way down to the quantum level, or is it just the neurotransmitter level, or action potentials, or something higher, neural networks? Yeah, I think you get the same sort of issue.
Yeah, but like the truth of functionalism depends on these issues.
Yeah,
like if you say functionalism is true, at least like this original version from Putnam. If you say this is true, like you're committed to certain views and views is the wrong word. You're committed to the resolution of certain questions.
Right.
And if they're not resolved, it's not so clear what you're actually saying.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, there's relatively simple systems that you can give answers to this for, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, like the famous
Mm-hmm.
example of the
Yeah,
Coke
that's true.
machine,
Yeah.
its inputs are
Mm-hmm.
quarters and its outputs are bottles
Mm-hmm.
or whatever.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know,
Even that, I would say even the Coke machine. I mean, I haven't thought about this detail, but I would say even that doesn't work because the claim is right. Functionalism is true. I forgot whether it's only if or if, like probably yeah, if certain conditions are true,
mhm.
and the conditions reference inputs, and it's not clear what the inputs are. Like, how do you know that the input is a quarter, and why isn't it like the quarter including the part of the brain, your brain, that puts in the quarter,
I
or why
see.
isn't it just like so there's so. I haven't thought about this in detail, but I think that like sort of these if you make a claim like this,
Mhm.
that's that yeah. I think there yeah, I have to think about detail, but I think there's things you have to resolve. Otherwise, you're easily saying something that you maybe didn't want to say.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That good. That's good for me. Good. So another nail in the coffin of
No,
functionalism.
yeah. I mean, I've been saying the same thing about higher. Like when we met in New York, I do. By the way, this was a great restaurant. I forgot the name, but
Ja ja ja
it was
or
really.
ha ha ha.
Ah, yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, this is the same thing with higher order theories, right? Like as you just said, like what's a thought,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Like, and how free am I in choosing like what a thought is and how they compose or decompose, or how fine grained when do I have one thought, when do I have five thoughts? And
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying that I don't want these things like they're not supposed to be like criticisms, but these are just like things you can think about,
Yeah.
and
No,
that's where
it's
I
true. Most of
usually
these theories are
start.
underspecified, criminally so.
Yeah, and like maybe I shouldn't say this, but this is the reason why I like the formalism so much.
Hmm.
Not because it forces you to make absurdly concrete specifications that are completely unwarranted, as in many cases. But formalism can somehow represent uncertainty in a very good way. If you say this is a set of thoughts, like let T be a set of thoughts, and then it has the following properties, and then you can work on with the properties, and you don't have to do any extra specifications that maybe don't matter for your theory. Yeah, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, no, I agree.
yeah,
I'm agreeing with you.
yeah,
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 absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
But you can kind of
You
artificially
know,
restrict the definitions in a way just to like get you thinking about the issues, though.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You mean yeah. So, do you have any hunch on like how you would define thoughts in a higher order theory in terms of like biology?
I mean, I don't. So that's why I talk about
Mm,
representations because thoughts are kind of a
mm,
nebulous category, I would say. Even in terms of neuroscience, we don't really know.
mm,
I mean, we know some
mm,
areas associated with them, the prefrontal
mm,
cortex and such, but what is a thought neurobiologically
mm.
is a difficult.
Yeah,
It's hard to say. So it would
yeah.
probably be some pattern of neural activation or some kind of neurotransmitter um, profile in terms of a wide swath or area of the brain in terms of the activation profile there. So uh, it's open, I would say. But so, you know, in philosophy, we tend to think of thoughts as propositional attitudes, where there's a kind of attitude that you take towards some represented content. Um, so if you make that distinction, then they may correspond to different elements in the brain, so that the attitude part could
Mm,
correspond to something neurochemical, and the
mm,
representational part could correspond to some kind of pattern of neural activity, and the two
mm,
combined may give you a certain state
mm,
of your propositional
mm,
attitude. But it's all speculative. I don't think there's anything
mm,
really you could
mm,
say about it at this point.
mm. Yeah, well, it's super interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, it
I
is.
didn't know. I mean, I didn't know that higher order theories were compatible even with biological naturalism. So it's very good to know. I didn't know that. Makes total sense.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
think I'm the only one in the universe who has this
I see.
combination of views, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Like, as far as I know, every other higher order theorist is a just straightforward functionalist. I know David Rosendahl is for
Mm,
sure,
mm,
um,
mm, mm.
but I've just, never. I just think that it's not clear what these things
Yeah.
really are, and honestly, I don't think it's really clear what they are in David's theory either. He says they're theoretical posits from folk psychology. So it's
Mm,
unclear to me whether he expects them even to
mm,
be realized in the
mm,
neural architecture, or whether they're just like it's an intentional stance
mm,
that you could take at the higher level.
mm,
And
mm,
I'm just not really 100% sure
mm,
about what his actual view with that respect to that
mm,
is.
mm,
He says some things that make you think one or the other, so that I think the intentional stance is a way you could go where you could say, look, they don't need to be actually correspond to any physical thing in the brain. It's a useful way of interpreting the system, which if you
Mm,
didn't have, you couldn't make certain predictions. I'm more
mm,
of a realist in that. I want there to be something in the brain that this corresponds to.
mm,
And so that's kind of what led me to thinking about this kind of stuff.
yeah. Yes, I think as I told you before, I once had this hope of being able to put like David Rosenthal's assumption in like a nice sort of neat, like formal, you know, content, like sort of box with a
Yeah,
nice picture where you could use it for teaching or whatnot or thinking about it. And yeah, when we started talking, I mean, it's very complicated, and I really
exactly.
struggled to get my head around it.
Yeah.
And what exactly the different things mean and how they're related and how they're identified. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
So I have toyed with
mm,
the idea that you could get kind of a quality space for thoughts in the same way that you could get
yeah,
with
yeah,
the sensory qualities, where each
mm,
propositional attitude corresponded, like formed a family in
mm,
a certain way.
mm.
Um, I had a paper on this one that I wrote when as a graduate student. I never really did
Oh,
anything with
really?
it, but I
Mm,
kind of have
okay.
that idea kicking around the back of my
Mm,
head that you might be able to form
mm,
some sort of web of the propositional attitudes that's going
yeah.
to correspond to something
Oh, that's
like a
yeah.
quality
That's
space.
super, yeah. Super interesting because like when I read about higher order theories, I once heard this very good talk in Munich at the MCMP by I forgot who the person was that gave the talk, but it was about an algebra of beliefs, so mathematical structure you
Mm.
would have for beliefs. And as far as I remember, like the idea would be like this would be a form, it could be a starting point, or maybe even not a starting point, like a formal representation of like the properties of thoughts that matter. It would
Mm.
be a space. I mean, it wouldn't be like a three-dimensional space with a metric, but um, so yeah. So that I always think about this. So this is like in the back of my mind when I try to think about like what some higher order theories like try to say. I think, well, you could have this formalization of thoughts, and again, not to like enforce it, but just to know what exactly is being like what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for something to be a thought in
Yeah.
terms of like the theory that it's embedded in, how you can represent this. So now, yeah,
Exactly. I agree. But I think that's why representation is a clearer notion, at least to some degree, because you
yeah,
don't have to worry
yeah,
about a lot of the baggage that comes
yeah,
with saying that something is a thought.
yeah. Would you say that like is there like one unique account of representation that you have in mind, or
I
like
have a kind of general generic account according to which
uh,
representation involves accuracy conditions. So a
mm-hmm,
thought would be one type of having a truth condition
mm-hmm,
would be one type of accuracy
mm-hmm,
condition, but the notion goes
mm-hmm,
is broader than that, just specifying the way the
mm-hmm.
world would have to be in order for it to be accurate.
Okay, okay, yeah.
So pretty
Because I also, I
generic.
mean, I'm very sorry to be so, but I also for representation like in philosophy of science, there's a bunch of different notions that you can
Exactly.
use, and I'm sure that they don't carry over like one to neuroscience or cognitive science.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I agree. So that's I think that the
yeah,
notion that I have in
yeah,
terms of accuracy conditions is broad enough to be compatible with a lot of
yeah,
specifications.
yeah.
So I
I
don't
see, I
really
see, I
feel
see.
like I
Yeah,
need to take
yeah, yeah,
a stand on that. But I do
yeah. I
have a
should
kind
learn
of
that. Yeah,
a
yeah.
tendency to lean towards teleosemantics,
Mm-hmm.
mostly because I studied with Ruth Millikan and I found her
Yeah,
views
I think.
pretty convincing. But I'm not
What is
super committed
teleosemantics
to that.
again?
What?
Yeah. What is teleosemantics again?
It's basically the idea that there's some kind of evolution or causal historical
Mm-hmm.
reason for
Mm-hmm.
explanation for an account, a
Mm-hmm.
representation having the content that it does. So
Mm-hmm.
there has to
I
be
see, I
some
see, I see. Yeah.
competition and some reason that
Yeah.
this sort of representation won out, or this sort of state won out, and that so we can
Yeah.
say that it has like the function of representing
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
a certain object in the
I
world, and
see.
that's why it's a representation at all, is because it has that function.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of ways of spelling that
Okay.
out. I think David
Yeah.
Papineau, Ruth Millikan, there's a lot of people who are
Mm-hmm.
sort of well known for this. Karen Neander is another one,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
the basic
Yeah.
idea is that it's like a biological function.
I
Ruth's
see. I
book,
see.
Language, Thought, and Other Biological Categories, was very influential on me. So I kind of have a soft spot for that way of thinking about things, like what makes something a
Mm-hmm.
representation is its evolutionary
Mm-hmm.
history in terms of there being
Mm-hmm.
competition among different kinds of states,
Mm-hmm.
this one winning out for a reason, being selected for performing a certain job.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I need to read up on that end.
Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot. Yeah. I mean, I have this. I love this account. So basically, it's a kind of structuralist account of representation. I forgot the authors again. But so it's very, I think it's people like it very much like in philosophy of science, where you basically, this is wrong what I'm saying now, but it's the idea is basically that it needs to be some sort of structural correspondence together with a few additional conditions, and then you have a representation. I mean, I like this because it's like it's easy to wrap your hand around as someone who works formally, but obviously like this is yeah. I need to read up much more on these things. Yeah.
You know, I like your push towards the formal stuff. I think it's good, and it makes people be clearer about what they're trying to say. So I think that this is a welcome, um,
Yeah.
something that we need in this area. On the other hand, I am skeptical that everything,
Yeah.
like you said, that everything can be formalized, or that not that it can't. I think everything can be formalized, but whether it's useful
Yeah.
to formalize everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, I fully agree. Yeah, I think I wasn't aware of this myself for a long time, but I mean, for like trying to formalize can really hinder your progress. It can be like you build yourself a wall that you then can't jump over.
yeah,
And I fully, yeah, and I think that this is true for some of the theories of consciousness. And like it would be much, yeah, it would be
yeah,
much more helpful in some cases if you didn't formalize too much. I mean, the reason, like even when I try to write pieces in the paper which are not formal, like for me, like formalism is just like it's a way to know that what I'm saying somehow is true, like the logical side of it at least.
yeah.
Like I feel uncomfortable if you force me to not do it, and then usually editors force me to write to summarize it non-formally. So I do, and then everyone jumps on like the non-formal summary, which is
Yeah,
obviously like
exactly.
not the whole thing, and yeah.
Yeah, after all
So
that effort,
yeah,
yeah, they're like you put in some words
yeah,
and they're like, aha, this.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I do
Yeah,
go back and forth on this because I did think at one
yeah,
time someone famously said if you can't formalize it, then you don't really understand what you're saying, or that
yeah,
if you can't understand the equations of general relativity, then you
yeah,
don't really understand general
yeah,
relativity. And
yeah,
I sort of don't 100% think that's accurate. Actually, I think
yeah,
you can understand the
yeah,
theory without knowing the math.
yeah,
The math
yeah,
helps, and every
yeah.
it disguises certain assumptions and lets you gloss
Mm,
over certain things,
mm,
like what exactly is a frame of reference, what does that
mm.
mean
Yeah,
exactly in terms of
yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah, you can define it formally,
yeah,
but
yeah,
and the same is true of, I mean, the most obvious example is quantum
yeah,
mechanics. So sure, you can do all
yeah,
the linear algebra you want, but what is it really telling us,
yeah.
and which parts are physically real? That's still
Mm,
a question that we're
yeah,
grappling with. So even though we have a
yeah,
perfect
yeah,
formalization, it's
yeah,
not clear how that maps onto anything that we care about. So it does seem to me to
yeah,
be a bit of a double-edged sword.
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's like on. So the big question is, what do we mean by understanding, right? And
Hmm.
people say you can't understand quantum mechanics. What exactly do they mean by understand? I mean, I think many people mean make sense in the sort of concepts you already have, and that
Right.
you can't really. That's true. Yeah, but I think so. I think, like for example, quantum theory is really a good example, like for these sort of things. And the reason I like formalism so much because I think basically I mean before I joined consciousness science, I was deeply into foundations of quantum mechanics and very much interested in all sorts of interpretations and modifications. And in my mind, like if you're doing there are two different things you can do, and both are important, as important. But one of them is like doing the science and trying to find a better theory,
Hmm.
and the other one is doing metaphysics about what means,
Right.
and what is real, and how to interpret it. And I think both are important and they interact. Like, obviously, like for I think the most important, that's not a thought from myself, that's a thought from a good friend from back then. The most important function that metaphysics has for a scientist is to help you choose which way you go about trying to make a better theory, a
Right.
better scientific theory. But what I'm trying to say is, like, for me, if I think about quantum theory, the only ground truth there is the formalism. This is like any paradox you want, whatever is being said, you can make sense of it in terms of one of the few formalisms we have. There are a number of reformulations of the same thing and a number of modifications. But so this is why somehow, like I think that if you leave the formalism, you're doing important work, interpretation, metaphysics, but somehow this is not like secured knowledge. The only secured knowledge we have is the formalism.
Right.
And for me, honestly, the same thing is about IT. Like there's so much, there are interpretations, there are motivations, there are alleged derivations, there's all sorts of things. But the only ground truth for me is like the formalism, that I can make sense of this and understand this. And I think that explains why I tend to go back to it. Not to say the other work is, and the other work is as important, if not more important, but somehow then you have the, like, what the ground truth for the respective debate is. And yeah. But
So you
yeah,
say that's metaphysics, but so I think this is a debate about what the job of science is. So is the job of
yeah,
science to tell
yeah,
us about the way the world
yeah,
is? In which case,
yeah,
quantum mechanics is sort of incomplete. If the job of science is
yeah,
not to tell us about the way
yeah,
the world is, then quantum mechanics
yeah,
is fine. It tells us exactly what we should
yeah,
expect in any given
yeah,
situation, and we find that, so it
yeah,
works great.
yeah,
But there's an older, I mean, if
yeah,
you go back in history, it seemed like
yeah,
the job of
yeah,
science was to try to tell us the way the world
yeah,
itself is. Quantum
yeah.
mechanics, the formalism of quantum mechanics doesn't is silent on that. That's why there's so
Yeah.
many interpretations, because it's not really
But
telling us the way the world is.
I wouldn't say it's silent on it. I would say it tells us the world is to a certain extent. Like, it tells us something. Like the formalism of quantum mechanics is very, very strict, and we know a lot of things about how the world is. We don't know, like, we don't have answers to good questions, like what sort of thing does it actually describe,
Well, but I
what's the
mean, it doesn't tell
metaphysics?
us how the
Yeah,
world is in the sense of it doesn't tell us if the world is classical. It doesn't tell us if the
yeah,
world is determinate. It doesn't tell us if, because you can have hidden variable
yeah,
theories, which
yeah,
are
yeah, yeah,
determinate and
yeah,
classical in a certain
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
And the
yeah.
formalism is compatible with that. Now, as far as I
That's
know,
true.
there's no
Yeah,
derivable
yeah,
contradiction. It may be
yeah,
implausible. You may like other versions
yeah,
for it. So,
yeah,
so is it telling us
yeah,
how the world is? It just seems like it's
yeah.
you know,
Yeah, no,
if
yeah,
you take only the
yeah,
Heidegger,
yeah,
the equations that we have right now and don't add anything
yeah,
to them,
yeah,
yes. But if you
yeah,
add some stuff to them, which it's fine with,
yeah,
then
yeah,
you get a
yeah.
completely different picture of how the world is.
But I meant it like this. Like I agree that these are the questions that it doesn't answer, right? Is the world classical or is the world local even?
Yeah, right.
It doesn't give it doesn't give. You can like cheat these answers by doing certain things, but it doesn't give definite answers, except for one case, Bell's theorem, where it does give definite answers to a very specific question. But
But
still, it
there's two.
contains
But it's not
but
clear.
it,
Even in Bell's theorem, though,
but
there's two things. So
yeah,
one is the
mm,
localness, and one is the hidden variable. And so what
yeah,
Bell's theorem rules out is local hidden
yeah,
variable. So which one do you go
yeah.
for? The local bit or the hidden
Yeah,
variable?
exactly. But it tells you that it's not both. So, I mean, some people call this realist, the second assumption, which is like a very specific term in this context. It's not what realist means otherwise. But
Right.
like you can say, well, it's not local and realist. So it's not local and hidden variable. And that's to the best of my knowledge, that's the only case we ever had where a scientific theory implied such statements. It's
Hmm.
extreme. You know something about like you have an answer like this. Even so, you say it's not really helpful. It's tiny answer in the grand scheme of things. But it's crazy that this is even possible. But what I want to say is, like, so I think there's this one case where we actually get a definite answer from quantum theory. But what I want to say is, like, even just the formalism itself, and like the invalidation of the totality of the formalism that the whole formalism that came before, like it constrains what we know about the world. It just doesn't give us these answers,
Right. I
right? It's
see.
not that like it's like by it's more like we know certain models don't work, and that's what quantum theory teaches us, and
Hmm.
that's already knowing something, and we can build computers with that. Like the whole modern age is based on semiconductor physics, which is based on quantum physics. So what I'm saying is like it gives us some knowledge, but not the ultimate answers, not these answers that may really matter to us if we're interested in foundational stuff. It doesn't help if I tell you, according to quantum theory, these systems are Hilbert space. That's not going to keep you up at night.
Yeah.
You want to know whether, it's like, what sort of reality is there? Is it classical or not? Or,
Right. Or
yeah,
even what a
yeah.
measurement is.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I got someone else who wants to come on. Do you mind if we have
Oh
another
yeah.
person join us?
Not at all. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. Did it work? Uh-oh. Yeah, there it goes. Okay. Hello, mysterious Stewart. Hello.
It's not working. I think right now, at least.
Hello.
Yes, hello. How's it going?
Yes, hello. I'm German too. I don't know whether Johannes is German or Austrian.
In between. No, I'm German. Yeah.
Right.
There's
And
this.
hello,
Do you know
Richard.
this?
Hello.
What?
Do you
Hello.
know this
Yes.
tribe that has been discovered at the German-Italian border? That's
Ooh,
me. No, I'm just saying I'm from the south
nothing.
of Germany. Yeah,
Right. Bavarian.
yeah,
Schwabe.
I have no
Yeah,
idea
I
what you
would.
guys are
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about.
Sorry. Never mind. Yeah.
Um, Richard, I just had two issues or two questions. I just wondered what your thoughts were. I want to make it short.
Okay.
Regarding the zombies, how would you call it?
Shambes.
Zombies
Yeah.
argument?
Hmm.
Yes, well, I heard about it. I saw some of your videos, and I was intrigued. And I tried to give it. I'm not a physicalist, but I tried to give it a very you know I tried to give it a go, and I started to try to conceive of a zombie as you wrote about it, but I found myself not being able to do so, and I wondered why. And then I thought to myself, well, can I really imagine something to like? I mean, you have aphantasia, if I understand it correctly, right?
I do. Yes.
Well, when I think about zombies or zombies, I actually imagined it. Like I have a mental picture of it, and I don't find myself to be able to imagine something that is like I try to assume a first person view of like the zombie, and also try to imagine a third person view of the zombie at the same time.
Hmm.
And I guess it would be a bit like, from your own perspective, looking at your body, or maybe like in the Dennett's thought experiment, where you look at your own brain, where it's like with a machine, um, uh,
Yeah.
there's data being transmitted, and you can look at your own brain, and it's very weird. Um, And I thought to myself, well, where's the issue I have with it? And I came to the conclusion the issue I have with it is that I actually am not able to really imagine a third person view of a zombie or a zombie for that matter at all. Like I
Yeah.
can only imagine it in a first person perspective kind of way, like with its qualities. Like I imagine a human being with the color of his skin and how a human being, feels to the touch and how maybe they smell or whatever. And I guess that's one of the issues with defining what the physical is.
Uh-huh. For poor Johannes here, who doesn't know probably what we're talking about,
Oh,
a Shambi is
ah,
a creature that's like similar to what Keith Frankish calls an anti-zombie, which is a physical duplicate of me, but which has consciousness. I often deploy this in arguments against people who want to invoke zombies. So
I did
first of
see the
all,
episode. Yeah.
yeah,
I
okay.
did see the reply you had to Keith
Oh, okay.
and
We're going to talk about that. Keith and I are going to get together and talk one of these days. We're
okay,
going to
nice.
just get scheduled it coming up here soon.
Yeah.
Anyway, so first of all, I'd say that I don't think you have to imagine this if what imagine means in this is the sense of picture it. Because what we're interested in is
mm,
conceivability. And conceivability, at least in the
right.
sense that we're talking about here, is just basically whether or not there's a contradiction entailed by the scenario which is described. So you could do that totally
Yes.
non-pictorially. That's what Chalmers calls negative conceivability. Primary conceivability is a different issue, but even that probably doesn't involve imagination. Second of all, I would say that yes, I do have aphantasia, but I think I have a very good imagination. It's just not pictorial. I can imagine all
Ah,
sorts of things. I like to draw. I like to write. I don't think imagination, in the sense that would matter here, involves like literally forming a mental image. I admit that I can't form a mental image. I do have dreams though, but I still am not sure whether the dreams are pictorial. It seems to me that they are, but I don't know. Um, anyway, so I agree about those issues, but I don't think that you're supposed to like picture the Shambi world. You're supposed to just think about whether there's something contradictory in the idea of consciousness being physical.
right.
And I don't think that there is anything contradictory about it. Now, as far as those who, like you, can't imagine it or conceive of it, I would say that's kind of exactly the point of the Shambes argument is that
Mm.
so I say I can, you say you can't, and then now we want to know who's right. If certain views about modality are correct, then only one of us can be right. And I'm sort of assuming some kind of modal rationalism in order to argue
Yes.
with the opposite side. So either zombies or Shambes are the ones that are ideally conceivable. And I think that what the fact that people have different intuitions in this case suggests is that we don't know which one because I think it's Shambes, you think it's zombies, and well, we both can't be right. So who's really the ideal conceiver? It just comes down to table pounding and fist pumping. And at that point, I sort of think that I've established my point, which is that we don't
Yes.
have a reason to reject physicalism.
Well, actually, I would say that first of all, I don't think that zombies as an argument would even work. I agree with that.
Okay.
That's basically question begging. I mean,
Okay.
it kind of is. More like the Mary's room argument, should be seen more as an intuition pump.
Uh huh.
Like in itself, the Mary's room, to me at least, it does not appear to be an argument, but rather just to the very hard-headed physicalist to just show them that there's an at least prima facie or prima facie or whatever
Yeah.
difference between experience or the content of experience and the content of abstractions of experience, like, as you would read in a book about, and so on.
Right, right.
Um,
What is the hardhead
and
physicalist doesn't need to know that. So, I mean, I think everybody agrees that, well, everyone except Dennett agrees that Mary learns something when she comes out of her room. Um,
yes, yes, and I
but
think
that's
that's really
that's just concept empiricism. So all of that shows is that you need to have the experience to get the concept.
sure. And actually, that's I think that's all that's needed. But among the many more well-known philosophers, it's really just maybe Dennett and or maybe François Camara or
Hmm.
whatever. But on YouTube, on Facebook, and so on, there are just a lot of people. Maybe Pete Mendick too, like quietists and so on,
Yeah,
that would try to deny that it's even coherent to say that someone has an experience, or at least it's the what is meant by experience is not coherent or something.
yeah.
Um, I think for those actually just it is an intuition pump. And I mean, you also have I got onto your live stream a bit late, but we were talking about functionalism and maybe behaviorism, and to them, I mean, this too would work as an argument just to when to confront them with that incredibly Mary does learn something, or I mean, it's not really about knowledge, but Mary encounters something when for the first time seeing red.
I mean, it is called the knowledge argument, so it seems like it's about knowledge.
Sure, sure, but I personally think it shouldn't be about knowledge, but it de facto is. You're right about that.
But I so
Anyway,
I don't think that so the functionalist has a good explanation in terms of knowledge of the state from a third person is not the same as being in that state. And when Mary
sure.
sees the tomato, she enters into a certain functional state, and that's what it is like to see red for her. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't think the Mary argument is any better than the zombie arguments.
Uh,
It confuses a
anyway,
bunch of issues actually because the issue
yeah,
is really about how you acquire phenomenal concepts. And at least the zombie argument clearly hones in on the issue, which is whether or not
yes.
consciousness has to be physical or it's separatable
Uh,
from the physical. Whereas knowledge argument doesn't really, you need like 4 steps to get to there.
Yes, that's why I said I don't think it's good as an argument, just as an intuition pump to get one to the point where one can then talk about, what are phenomenal, what is the content of phenomenal experience, and so on.
Yeah.
I think just for that purpose they are good, but above that, yeah, you need more arguments. There needs to be more argument.
Yeah. I mean, so that's the
No,
whole point of the Shambi argument is just to try to
yes,
press the issue against
I,
people who think
yes,
intuitions are good enough. People like Philip Goff, people like
I
David Chalmers. That's who the argument's aimed at. And also illusionists.
I mean, to me, not objection, but what I was trying to say is that it would also render the zombie argument ineffective, because you could not really imagine a zombie that is not conscious. Anyways, you cannot even imagine a zombie. I cannot even imagine an atom. Like, I have no idea what even. And maybe you can put my issue I have in this term too, or in these terms, like when someone says, is there but when I formalize it like that, it's maybe a bit not very interesting. But anyway, that you can put it like, can something be both mental and physical at the same time? And then my point would be, well, what do you mean by physical? And it's a relatively well-known issue, like defining physical or maybe natural.
Yeah. I mean, so my
That's
strategy to talk about
yes.
what physical means is to say, well, first of all, what we mean is not fundamentally mental. So that's the via negativa that a lot of people talk about. Second of
Yes.
all, that it won't be any different than what water is like, and that the idea is that consciousness and water are going to be in some sense similar. And then thirdly, we could say that it's whatever can be put into mathematical terms, and what can be deduced from that, or can be known on the basis of that, if you don't like to talk about deduction. So that if you have a physical a system described in terms of physical predicates, namely the ones that occur in our mathematical physics, then what can you know on the basis of that? So I think you could probably know that there's water on the basis of a description of that kind. And if the same would be the case with respect to consciousness, so that what physical is, I know is a deep and serious problem in philosophy, but I don't think it's insurmountable.
What you just said, does that not also, is there not also an explanatory gap, like the physical, if you try to define it via the abstract and mathematical, like how do you bridge this gap just for us to understand what's meant by physical between the abstract and the concrete?
What's the
I
gap?
mean, the gap. Well, how do you? What does, or what could the abstract tell us about this concrete substance? Like, what does it really tell us?
Yeah.
But maybe you just define it as that is even I cannot
I mean,
wait a second beschreiben auf Englisch. Johannes, wenn du da bist.
Describe.
it sounds like
Yes.
describe.
Yes, describe. That you can even describe the physical in these terms, whereas you can, of course, not describe, how red looks like in an abstract term, which kind of doesn't work.
Well,
Maybe
that's
that's
what's up for debate,
about it,
actually.
okay.
So I wouldn't say that.
I don't know. That's to
But
me
so
maybe.
it's like when you have a abstract formal description of a system,
Yes.
then to say that
Yes.
abstract thing is realized in a concrete system is to say, amongst other things, that the state transitions described formally can be mapped onto the causal structure of the system.
Yes, maybe, but again, this, at least as I see it right now, doesn't really tell you what the physical at its fundament really is. Is, other than that, it can be described in abstract terms. And I mean, if you're correct and the mental can be described in abstract terms, then maybe the eliminativist would say, see, the mental is nothing but the physical. I mean, I don't know. Is that not then maybe a contradiction there? Like, you wouldn't want to be if eliminative physicalism was true, you wouldn't want it to include the mental as understood in phenomenological terms, right?
Well, I'm not an
Well, I'm not
illuminativist. I'm a phenomenal realist.
Oh, of course, of course. I mean, just, um, I mean, if you assume this view that the physical is that which can be described in abstract terms, and the mental too could be described in abstract terms, then the eliminativist that would agree with that the physical can be described in abstract terms
Hmm.
and the mental, then the physicalist, the eliminativist would believe and not believe in the mental at the same time. I mean,
Hmm. I
that's
see what you're
just what I
saying.
see to be a
Yes.
contradiction in that.
Hmm. Yeah. So
But
I so
anyway,
I think there's a difference
yes,
between eliminativism and reductionism. Um,
of course, obvious.
Especially in the sense that the eliminativist wants to say that all there is the physical stuff, and that there's no description of the other thing which maps onto that. So if you take like phlogiston or ghost or something like that, those things are going to
Sure.
be eliminated because the causal processes that they describe don't have any there's no way to map them onto anything which makes them look like they're real. But when it comes to consciousness, I just don't think that you're going to have something like that happen.
Mm,
So it's especially if you take the kind of opponent's point of view, which is what I was doing, which is the modal rationalism stuff. So if on the basis of the physical description, you can come to know certain things are true, namely, for example, that water exists or that pain exists, then those things are real because you can know them on the basis of the physical description.
right,
So there's no
right.
eliminativation there. So the eliminativist may have a view that's saying that
Good.
those things are real, are not real, but
I'm just saying
I
that,
think they'd be wrong.
yes, I think most people would say they are wrong, but I just was trying to, as I think you understood that this seems to be an issue for me if you are defining the physical as that which is being described by the abstract, but also believe that the mental can also be described in the abstract.
Hmm.
Anyway, um, the other issue was
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, Johannes,
I
go
just
ahead.
want
Hold
to
on
say,
just one second. Go ahead.
no, there's no thought. So I just want to say, this was wonderful. I didn't have a good conversation at all today, so it was a pleasure to jump in. And I just want to say, I'm gonna have to run, but I really appreciate this, Richard. Like I think I watch almost everyone, and I appreciate the thoughts and the humor. And yeah,
Thanks. I
it's just
appreciate
really
that,
nice.
Johannes. Yeah,
Thanks
it's
for
great to
doing
have
this.
you.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
have to
So
have you
maybe
on
we'll
in
tune in
some
a
more
little bit.
formal capacity in the future.
I don't have anything to say. See, that's the problem. But I'm happy to listen. Okay, I'm gonna jump. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll watch the rest of this another time. Take care.
Cool.
Bye
Thanks,
bye. Nice
Johannes.
to meet you, Stuart. You guys.
Cheers. All right, get
right.
started. Go ahead.
I'm actually going to go soon as well, but I'm trying to remember what I was actually going to say.
Your second problem with Shambes, I think it was.
Yes, and I'm trying to remember. I'm lying in bed right now. That's all I do. So I didn't write anything down. Um, huh. Well, whatever. I can't remember right now.
Okay.
Um, Other than that, you were talking with Johannes about Ruth Milligan and um, teleosemantics.
Yeah.
And in the past, just by the way, I appreciate Johannes, despite not being a native English speaker, can formalize what he's trying to say much better than I can. I'm rambling, and he gets to the point.
Yeah,
I
no
think
problem
that's
though.
yes, well, but I just think that's pretty impressive. Anyway, um, with regards to the teleosemantics, in the past I came across a person who said that Ruth Millikan's um, teleosemantics would give an account of how intentionality can be explained in naturalist or physicalist terms. And I read the paper, I read material, and I just didn't get it. Like how? I mean, she is trying. As I wrote it, it's been a long time, but as I read it, I thought she was just saying why on naturalism it would make sense that there is is that there just is intentionality, and like what does she say? Like the beating heart, she gives as an example,
Mm-hmm.
but it did not understand how that would, in naturalistic terms, explain how things or how a natural entity or physical entity is about something. Ah, right, actually, that gets me back to what I didn't remember just now. But let's forget about that.
No, we can bring
Anyway,
that up
could you
next. But
maybe?
basically, the idea is so if you wanted to know what the heart was for, what its job was, what function it served, then you would have to look at
Yes.
the history of the organism, and you would find that the job that the heart performs was selected for on the basis of competition with other such similar systems, which didn't work out, and that this thing has the job of pumping blood because it was selected by evolutionary pressure in order to perform that job. And her basic idea is that the same is going to be true with respect to intentionality. That certain states will have intentional be about other things in the world because they've been selected to perform that job, and there will be consumer systems in the brain that have the job of reading those things, and that so there will be some states that are producing and other states that are using these outputs to do various things like guide behavior or whatever, and that we could say that a state has a particular intentional content because it was selected. Now, there's a lot of details under the hood, but that's the basic general idea is that you want to tell a story about how the evolutionary history of the organism makes it the case that this is the job that these things have.
Right. I think then just the person I was speaking to was either there was a misunderstanding or he was trying to sell me that the teleosemantic theory was doing something that it just doesn't even aim to do, like explain how a physical thing can be about something.
No, that is what it tries to do.
It, well, then I kind of don't see it. Like it explains why it came to be that, or why it would make sense in a naturalistic setting for there to be intentionality, maybe, or how the evolutionary process would give rise to it, but how an atom is about something, or how it came to be about something within, well, like the brain or whatever, and not maybe not the atom. I mean, I guess Ruth Millikan is not a panpsychist, um, but maybe how this set of atoms formed in a brain pattern, how this then has intentionality. I don't see how teleosemantics would arrive at that point. Like intentionality as seen. A letter is about something, but that seems to be more of an extrinsic kind and not intrinsic kind. Like consciousness is about something. A letter is
Well,
only about something,
yeah. So
as
Ruth
I
is not
see it.
talking about consciousness. I mean, I have an interview with her on my channel. You could check
Oh,
out someday.
I didn't
But
know.
she's not really talking about consciousness, but just intentionality, how thoughts get to be about something.
Yeah.
And you're right; it's
Yes, yes,
definitely in terms of extrinsic characteristics.
yes.
And she
Right.
thinks your thoughts
Yeah.
could be about things that you're confused about and don't, you're not going to um, uh, gonna know about. But but basically the idea is that these things have the content that they do in terms of their history, in terms of them being selected to perform certain jobs, and that they have to compete against other things. So that the reason that the thought is about, my thinking that the dog is brown is about the dog and it's being brown is because those things have been competed against other things, and these ones won out because they serve to indicate that thing in the environment.
Right. But it just doesn't address the consciousness part
Oh, yeah, it's not about consciousness at all.
Yes, I think then that the person, I was talking to this person about how could consciousness how could consciousness emerge from the physical in his case. And he said, well, at least with regards to intentionality, here, look at this paper, read it, it explains how it can be. And I think either he misunderstood the paper himself or he tried to make it into something that it just isn't.
Yeah, I think you're right about that if you're talking about consciousness.
Yes,
And maybe
definitely.
Ruth is a panpsychist, by the way. When I talk to her, I guess I'm not supposed to tell people this stuff, but she's very into Whitehead, and he's kind of a panpsychist,
Yeah,
of a sense.
like with the great god Pan too. Like he has what does his conception of God do again? Bring abstract what? Whitehead has a place of a kind of God in his metaphysics.
I mean, honestly, I don't know that much about Whitehead, so I couldn't really say.
All right.
But
All right.
Ruth's just trying to talk about intentional states like beliefs and desires and those kinds of things, and not really talk about the. But I agree with you that conscious states do have intentionality. The question is whether or not intentionality is something which carries over from the unconscious states, and can be explained in some further way or not. But yeah, it's good. I don't think you. I think you're right
Right.
that maybe your friend was overreaching if the idea was to
It,
explain conscious
it
intentionality.
was absolutely only about that. I think he never really. I mean, it wasn't really a friend and an acquaintance. But I'm not sure he ever really understood what is meant by consciousness. Like he was trying to say, why intentionality is clearly physical. Like a painting is physical, right? And it's about if there's a house on the painting, then this house is about something. And yes, maybe in the extrinsic sense, it is about something in relation to a mind that interprets these particles of color or whatever on the linen. But I think he just misunderstood what the issue was. Anyway, what I remembered about the Shambes, maybe if you assume a via negativa of what the physical is, then I mean that would kind of make. I mean, it's not a contradiction in that sense, but to say that something is both physical and mental would mean it's mental and non-mental at the same time. I mean, that's kind of like something is abstract and concrete at the same time, where these are just the inversion of each other.
Well, I don't think
I mean,
that follows. So if like a view like the identity theory that I'm friendly to is true, then some mental things are physical and some physical things are mental. The via negativity says those things aren't fundamental. So what we want to rule out is that there's any kind of mentality at the bottom level, at the most fundamental level, but not to say that nothing physical can be mental or nothing mental can't be physical. That's exactly what the view says. It's just that, just like water is not fundamental to reality, neither is consciousness, according to my view. That doesn't mean they're
yes.
not real, though. Oh, Pete's in the chat.
No,
Hey, Pete, what's up? I just noticed you.
hello.
Go ahead and jump on if you want to talk, Pete.
I was just trying to make sense of it. I guess I have now something to think about. Right, I'm going to bail because it's late where I am at.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your comments and your thoughts.
Thanks for your thoughts on the issue. Have a good night.
You too. So what is Pete saying over here? He says the evolutionary account of proper functions adds how something can have a content without succeeding, indicating on some occasion, like how a blind eye can have the function of seeing. Yes, exactly. I would agree with that. It adds how it can fail. Ah, bus stop. I know my kids just are being picked up from the bus stop as well, and I'm slacking up here. All right, guys. So what else is going on around here? Let's see. What else does Pete say? And is it in part the story that prior to being selected, things can be detectors or indicators, aka natural signs? Yes, there is a bit about that. Um, Although that has to be cashed out in terms of the evolutionary function of the organism as well. Okay, so who's going to convince me of? Steven says, maybe I will jump on Zoom one of these days before Keith joins again. Okay, to defend illusionism and try to convince Richard. Oh, good luck with that. I don't see that happen. I mean, not with jumping on. You're welcome to jump on anytime, actually. But convincing me of illusionism. Um, the only way that you could convince me of illusionism is weak illusionism, which I think everyone is committed to. But it's not enough to do the job that the illusionists want. You have to be a strong illusionist to do that. And you'll probably never convince me that strong illusionism is true unless what you mean by strong illusionism is simply that consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, is real, but we misconceptualize it and therefore think about it in the wrong way. But by the way, while you're waiting to pick up your kids, Pete, I was wondering, you're a conceptualist, right? And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about Ned Block's recent argument against conceptualism, in particular the idea that perception can be non-conceptual, but there can still be categorical representation of a non-conceptual variety. So I was hoping to talk to Ned about that this very day, but since he had to cancel, I wonder if there's anyone else out there who is a conceptualist who has something to say about this. Um, Oh, strong and weak illusionism, a verbal dispute. Oh no, that can't be right. No, 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 that can't be right at all. The strong, in my opinion, the strong illusionist is someone who says phenomenal consciousness doesn't exist. The weak illusionist is simply who says the phenomenal consciousness isn't exactly what we thought it was. Those are completely different views. Um, I mean, I mean, I could see how you might want to try and defend how they're sort of related to each other because what does it mean to say it's other than we thought it was? And does that slide into saying um, uh, that it's not real? But whether representational properties count as phenomenal properties, if they do, then phenomenal consciousness is real. And so, but I sort of think that all of this stuff, that at a more basic level, it's just obvious that consciousness exists and that people who want to deny that are kind of either playing word games or I don't really know exactly why you would want to deny that phenomenal consciousness exists. Um, so I know people like Pete want to say there's no content to the notion. I don't even know why you would want to say that or what content there is to saying there's no content to it. But anyway, so I just think that is sort of the most obvious thing in the universe that I'm directly acquainted with, maybe that's too conceptually loaded, that there's something that it's like to be me from the first person point of view, and that's what we're trying to explain. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe I could be convinced that there's not much of a difference there. If strong illusionism is just type B physicalism, then it's not that interesting. We already had that view. If it's something other than that, I don't really understand what it is. All right, but off the top of your head, what are you saying? You don't see how you could have categorical perception sans concepts. Um, yeah, I wonder why. We'll have to talk about that sometime because I'm not sure. I mean, I found myself pretty convinced by most of the things that Ned was saying in his book, that perception can be non-conceptual in some sense. Um, but I'm not sure. I guess I don't really have a dog in this fight because I don't really care if perception is conceptual, to be honest. Um, yeah, I guess I don't. It sort of seems that maybe it could, maybe it couldn't. What do I think it is that Frankish and Dennett are denying, and you accept? It's not clear what they're denying because I don't really understand their view. So, given that I acknowledge aren't denying that we have experiences, I don't really acknowledge that they aren't denying that we are having experiences. I think that if you're a strong illusion, that's exactly what you're denying. You have to be denying that we're having experiences. But what I think that they're denying, I guess, would be that there's something that it's like for me to taste this Earl Grey tea that I've been sipping on for the last hour or so, that there's something that it's like for me, that there's a phenomenal property associated with that thing. I think that probably what Keith is sometimes more interested in, if you press him on this stuff, is some kind of Cartesianism, that these are irreducible properties of experience. I don't really know what's so bad about irreducible properties, to be honest with you. Um, it depends on what you mean by irreducible. Uh, so does he mean metaphysically irreducible, causally irreducible, or what? So I think that you could have different views on this here. But if consciousness turns out to be irreducible, then so be it. I sort of get the feeling that a lot of illusionists are motivated by avoiding dualism of some sort, and that they'll just say whatever it takes to avoid what they think of these as these strong arguments against dualism. I know that's not super charitable, and there's probably more to it than that. But it's hard to resist thinking that, to be honest with you, in my opinion. So yeah. Illusionism, pessimistic idealism says illusionism cannot get off the ground unless it can show that there can exist representations of particular determinate and or determinate essential qualities that not only do not have the particular determinate or determinate essential qualities they represent, but also are themselves totally devoid of determinate. Okay, maybe. Um, I think it has problems before that, even, but I sort of see what you're saying there. Pete says quality of quietism is way better than illusionism for exactly that reason. Is it? I don't think so. If quality of quietism simply says we don't know what phenomenal consciousness is and it's too messy of a concept to do any work, then it's in a way worse position, um, in my opinion, since we clearly do know what it is and all the important scientific issues turn on this concept. So anyway, that's a long-standing debate that Pete and I have had. Let's see. Stephen says, I think it would be hard to make sense of, for example, Chase and Sandbar dispute about the taste of coffee if we deny that there are experiences. Um, yeah, the Chase and Sandbar dispute is the whole point of Dennett is that it is hard to make sense of that. And that's his reason for denying experiences. It's exactly the point. As far as I interpret Jason, that bit of his argument is that we can't say which of these it is. So the whole idea of an experience is kind of confused. Um, who's this we? Quote we? Are you asking that about the Chase Sanborn stuff? Yeah, because I can make sense of it. I know, and I think even Pete has said some things about this in his what paper is that of yours of Pete in that volume on consciousness where you try to show the higher order theory can say something about Chase and Sanborn? Wasn't that your paper, or am I misremembering that? I don't know. Anyway, so I think that the two things, and this is something I said to Keith on Blue Sky. I said I'm not a verificationalist, so I'm not really worried about this kind of stuff. And Keith said that's not a very charitable thing to say. I don't know if it isn't a very charitable. I think it kind of is. It's a good thing to say, actually. So I think we could have a debate about that. But Keith's idea seemed to be that this is the place exactly where we would expect verificationalism to come in. And it's not really. I'm not really clear that that's true. If there are third person ways of telling the difference, if different theories give different predictions, even if the subject can't tell the difference first personally, it doesn't really. Oh yeah, it's in that conscious state anti-realism paper. Yeah, exactly. That's the one. Um, yes, good, good. Anyway, so yeah, I'm not really moved by those sorts of things, and I don't think, as far as Stephen's point, that they kind of this Chase Sanborn stuff um, motivates some conception of experience, which is common or something that we're trying to both explain or something like that. Um, so yeah, I'm not really sure. Let's see. I understand the CNS dispute as an issue with whether our experience can both be, in principle, ineffable and being directly acquainted with. not that experiences don't exist. I don't know. So who cares about being ineffable? So that's something that is a qualia theorist. By the way, that's one of the reasons why quietism is bad, because who talks about qualia nowadays? Nobody. That's who. Um, and I know there's alliteration there, and it's a mark of a developing mind to be obsessed with alliteration. Yeah. Okay. That's a joke, obviously, but no one talks about qualia. Qualia are theoretically loaded term by their nature. Um, so to even put this in terms of qualia is question begging. But anyway, okay. So, and in fact, they're defined in terms of being ineffable and private and all those kinds of things. I don't know if we need to build all that stuff in. So Chase and Sanborn have experiences, but not wholly separable from judgments. Well, yeah, so that means they have phenomenal consciousness. That's cool. Good to know. Have you on the team, Pete? What do you? Who's winning what here? What's going? I don't know exactly what's going on. Right. So, Stephen, if all they're rejecting is qualia theory, then that's not very interesting, because everybody rejects qualia theory. Every single buddy rejects qualia theory. Nobody accepts qualia as far that no one I know. I'm a phenomenal realist. I think phenomenal consciousness is real. That doesn't, what's that got to do with qualia? Qualia are specific theory about what phenomenal consciousness is that I don't think that anyone accepts. Maybe, I don't know. I saw a paper from Andrew Lee recently talking about sense datum theory and trying to resuscitate it. So maybe some people want to bring sense data back, and maybe sense data are kind of qualia. I don't know. But if all illusionists are doing is rejecting qualia theory, then so does every other theory. So does type B physicalism. So does you know, well, you name it, pick a theory. So that doesn't seem to me to be about what the um, debate is about. I don't know of any qualia lovers. Who are these qualia lovers? I'd like to know, have names. Name names. Let's see. C.S. Lewis. C.I. Lewis. Oh, good. God, you scared me. Not C.S. Lewis. C.I. Lewis has entered the chat. Haha, good one. Um, Reflective Journey is agreeing with me that philosophy of mind has moved past qualia. Yes, but Pete is not. Maybe, I don't know who these, maybe you have someone in mind that you could point me towards who's a qualia lover. You think Ned Block's a qualia lover? I don't. He's a phenomenal consciousness lover, not a qualia lover. Anyway, so there is a lot of interesting things. This is why I think, talking about illusionism is, oh God, not the possible girl guy. I'm not worried about that. Um, anyway, okay. Uh, which is why I said I think the dispute is a mere verbal dispute. Both weak and strong illusionists reject qualia theory. Um, yeah, but everyone rejects qualia theory. So, I mean, even Chalmers is a weak illusionist, and he's so the strong illusionist says phenomenal properties are qualia. The weak doesn't. Right. So that's not a verbal dispute then. Um, I'm not really, to all jokes aside, I'm not really familiar with Neil Sinababu's work apart from that embarrassing possible girls paper. So I'd have to look at what he says about qualia. Uh, yeah, but phenomenal character and phenomenal, what's character? I don't know what character is, but I don't think they're junk. They're good. They're good theoretical terms, which pick out real things. But I understand that people. Yeah, I know you love alliteration. That's why I made my joke about developing minds. Um, who is it, that famous person that said that love of alliteration is a mark of a weak writer, a poor writer? I kid because I love. But really, you should get rid of the alliteration. It should be like you're a phenomenal quietist or something like that. But whatever. I think it's distracting to put it in terms of qualia because no one accepts qualia or except Nielsen Obabu apparently, whose work I don't really know. Okay, so I think that depends if, as Frankish claims, whether non-physical is built into the notion of qualia. What else are non-physical properties if not qualia? Um, you think what depends on that? I don't think anything non-physical is built into the notion of phenomenal consciousness. That certainly is not the case. I staunchly support phenomenal consciousness, and I also am friendly towards physicalism. Um, so what's built into there? What's built into there is that there's something that it's like for me. What's built into there is that what it's like for me can be characterized in terms of certain properties which distinguish states in terms of their specific what it's likeness for me. Um, Well, Chalmers is definitely a weak illusionist. I don't think it depends on anything about qualia or being non-physical. He simply thinks that the way things seem to us isn't the way that they are in certain respects with respect to the properties of the world existing out external to us. So the redness of red and so forth and so on. Um, so that's the way things are, but really what's going on under the hood, according to Chalmers, is that we represent the causal source of these things or something like that. So it's uh, that's why he's a weak illusionist because he doesn't because phenomenal consciousness is real, but there's some aspect of it that we get wrong based on the way it appears to us. That really ultimately something else is going on, but he doesn't deny the existence of phenomenal consciousness. That would be a bit weird. To say that David Chalmers denies the existence of phenomenal consciousness. So I don't know what a radical realist is, and I'm not sure who you're asking what is just what is likeness. Um, so I'm not really sure who these questions or statements are aimed at. That's why you guys should come on to the Zoom chat with me so I can know what you're saying. I can't hang around too much longer anyway. So um, anyway, so yeah, phenomenal consciousness is just what is likeness. Yes, if that's what the question is, then I would say yes, that's the case. Um, Phenomenal consciousness is just there being something that is like for me, and phenomenal properties are the specific way things are like for me. We can make finer grained distinctions in terms of phenomenal character and subjective character, which I happen to like those kinds of distinctions. The phenomenal character being the thing which distinguishes conscious states from each other, subjective character being that thing which is common to all these kinds of states. Um, so there's a big debate about whether subjective character is itself what I call phenomenologically manifest, where to be phenomenologically manifest is to be part of one stream of consciousness, the way things seem to one from the first person point of view. And you can make sense of certain theorists as taking a stance one way or the other on whether subjective character is phenomenologically manifest. But basically, phenomenal consciousness is just that there is something that there's something that is like for me. That what is like for me is that which is phenomenologically manifest, the way things appear to me from the first person point of view. So yes, now what about what a radical realist is? I don't know. Is that just a dualist? Um, I'm not sure. Do phenomenal concepts need to be atomic for each singular experience? Yes, I would say that there's one kind of phenomenal concept, which is atomistic for each singular experience, namely the direct phenomenal concept of that I'm having this experience here. There's also a more general one, the phenomenal concept of redness or chartreuse, etc., that are more general, but they're absolutely is a atomistic one for each singular experience, I would say. So I think we have multiple kinds of phenomenal concepts. We need to distinguish different types of them. One type is the atomistic type, I would, according to me. Um, so which distinctions aren't helpful, especially when we talk about the physical character, functional character, or dispositional character? What else is the phenomenal character? The phenomenal character is what it's like for you. Um, that's what it is. So a radical realist seems to include dualists, but also potentially mental paint theorists, holy moly, where qualia are non-representational properties of our experience. I don't think it's fair to say that Ned has a um, qualia theory. Um, and I'm not even sure if he still accepts mental paint. That's one of the things I was going to ask him about today, whether or not the kinds of things that he's talking about are these mental paint things. But mental paint are non-representational um, uh, aspects of what is likeness or whatever. So um, I guess I'm friendly to mental paint in a way. Um, what's so radical about that? It's just that they're non-representational. Um, as far as I understand Block's view is that these states do have representational content, but it's not essential to them. It's even maybe something like David Papineau has endorsed. So in a different kind of way, maybe I don't think he exactly accepts mental pain, but he definitely accepts that there's non-representational things, um, qualities. What's I'm not sure what's so radical about it, but yeah. These are all interesting questions. And I don't know what you would want to be an illusionist about that kind of stuff for. So if what you're saying is, there is phenomenal consciousness, there's something that it's like for me, but the way that it really is, the way that it presents itself gives me a um, misleading view of how it actually is. I think that lots of people accept that view. Almost everyone has to accept that view. So to say that there is nothing that it's like for me, that property doesn't exist, is like verging on bizarre. That just seems to be radically at odds with the way things obviously are. So that seems more radical. That would be a radical kind of physicalism that I certainly couldn't accept. So yeah, I'm not really sure. Okay, so the dispute between these guys, Dennett and Block and Chalmers and Frankish, is whether we can functionally analyze our experiences. Um, yeah, I guess I'm radical then because I'm sort of on the side of non-functionally analyzing. But even if you weren't someone like me and you thought that you could functionally analyze our experience, you wouldn't have to be an illusionist. So there are functionalists out there who are not illusionists. Um, but I sort of see what you are saying. Yeah, I guess I'm sort of friendly to the non-functionally analyzable side of things. But I don't know why that makes us radical. I mean, I come from the 80s, so being radical is good. Radical dude. But other than that, if it's meant to be like, I know Keith's line on this is that it's somehow at odds with science or something like that, but I just don't see that at all. Um, so I'm not really sure what the more than rhetoric point is supposed to be, especially in terms of the conceivability of Shambes or anti-zombies. Once you have that on the table, I just don't think there's any reason at all to deny that these things can be physical and that we don't need to jettison them. So that we would need very strong reason, actually, more reason that's ever been presented. Um, you feel about illusionism the same way I feel about higher order theories. Holy moly. So higher order theories, according to me, are interesting because if they're going to be false, they'll be empirically false, but no one understands them, so that they should be developed so that we could see how they could be empirically false. So that's um, that's my interest in those sort of things, is to say what can empirically falsify them. But I see what you're saying there is you want to defend the view that you think it's misconstrued. But I don't think it's misconstrued. What's misconstrued is the work that these guys think that the theory can do once you fully understand what they're saying. If all that they're saying is there's no qualia, then that's not that interesting, since everybody says that. What they have to be saying is that there's no hard problem, and that the hard problem isn't there because, well, the thing we thought was hard doesn't exist. And once you say that, then there's no misconstrual. If that's the view, then it's just, kind of obviously false, um, because there is something there. It's the most clearest thing in the universe that there's something there. So yeah, I don't really know what's being misconstrued here. Um, it would be nicer if they were clearer about it and saying what they meant. What is the thing that they're saying doesn't exist, and what do they mean when they say you have an experience without the thing which is essential to experiences? So I agree. I think that your project is an interesting one. If you want to say it's misconstrued and then try to clarify it, that's worthwhile and welcome. But I just think that they're always dancing around this line, and it's not clear what side they're on. The one side is the strong view, saying that thing doesn't exist. You're just wrong about it. So all of the problems, everything you thought isn't there. However, once you sort of figure out what they're really saying, they're saying, no, 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 we're just kind of, saying that it's different than we think it is, but it's there. But I don't see how you get to do that. Um, yeah, exactly. But that's kind of my point that I've been making. So you say there's no hard problem if there are no qualia. No one believes that there are qualia, but lots of people believe that there's a hard problem. Um, And Shambes, as I've defined them, physical duplicates of you that have consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, even maybe irreducible phenomenal consciousness, but nonetheless, which is physical, show that zombies and super scientists and inverts and so forth and so on don't matter to the debate. So if what you're trying to do is to avoid that, you don't have to give up phenomenal consciousness. It just doesn't follow that the way in which you want to try to avoid the problems is required. Consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, could be physical. It could have been physical this entire time. So, what reason is there to think that it isn't? That some people have conceived of zombies? Well, what about Shambes? What about the other super scientists, the super phenomenologist, Maria, as I've called her, who was raised in a room and taught to only bracket her experience and think only about her phenomenology, and doesn't even really think in terms of an external world or physicality, but only in terms of the experiences she has. Is what happens when she's let out of the room and taught about and taught physics. So I think that um, giving up on consciousness because some people like Chalmers. So as you say, Chalmers thinks there's a hard problem because experiences reduce reductive explanation. And of course, yeah, so some people think it resists that, but Shambi show that it might not resist it, or that you could have it be physical without an explanation, either one. So what's the problem? Um, yeah, but Shambi showed that they might. So if the issue is that you want to avoid zombies, then the thing you should do is endorse anti-zombies or Shambis and phenomenally conscious being real. You don't have to give up the thing we're trying to explain. Or at least that's the way that I would put it. So that all of these, the whole point of the kind of two-dimensional argument against dualism or non-physicalism is to defang these kind of worries and let us endorse phenomenal consciousness. I will say that I think that the anti-zombie argument is different than the Shambi argument, because Keith puts it in terms of trying to prove that physicalism is true, whereas I put it in terms of showing that non-physicalism isn't true. And it's exactly the same strategy as a zombie argument. But anyway, so I just think that there's no, reason for us to give up phenomenal consciousness. There's some people who are skeptical that it can be reduced. So some people are not skeptical that it can be reduced. So what are you going to do? Like, there's people disagree about this. That doesn't mean you should say the thing isn't real. The thing you're trying to explain doesn't exist simply because there's disagreement about whether it can be reduced or not. And if it ever came down to it, that we actually definitively knew that it couldn't be reduced, then that would just be reason to be a dualist. We should be non-physicalists. If you're really convinced that the zombie argument works, then you should be a dualist, not an illusionist. That just kind of seems obvious to me. Okay, but I think at that point there isn't anything metaphysical that you are endorsing. Yes, there is actually. Um, it's whether this thing is real, that's metaphysical, and whether there is something that it's like for me in a subjective sense. That's not a verbal dispute. Keith is very clear that he denies that there is some kind of subjective aspect, and all there is this other thing, and I just completely deny that. So I think that's not just a verbal point. We are objecting over something metaphysical, which is whether consciousness is real, whether there is phenomenal consciousness. Keith just doesn't see how it could be a part of the physical world. I think I can. So the thing that we're disputing is whether that thing is a real part of the physical world. And if I was ever convinced that it couldn't be a part of the physical world, then I would become a dualist. I would become probably a quantum dualist. I wouldn't rule out panpsychism, but I'm not super friendly to it. But I'm not a dualist. I don't see any reason to become one. But that's the way I would go if I was really taking zombie seriously. I wouldn't start to say, "Oh, that thing doesn't exist," simply because I don't know how to explain it. That seems to me to be sort of the strangest thing ever. I won't say the most absurd or these other kind of things that people say, but it's very strange. I would say, as a rhetorical strategy, to say, "Oh, I can't explain it, so it's not real." That the thing which is right in front of us is a very strange thing to say, at the very least. Um, but if all that Keith means by phenomenal properties are qualia, then as I've said already, that's uninteresting because no one accepts the existence of qualia. Certainly Chalmers doesn't, Ned Block doesn't. So what is it that if they're trying to refute a theory that no one accepts, then the theory that their view is not very interesting. Um, so yeah. Um, femboy origami. Can higher order theories of consciousness allow for animal consciousness? Yes, I would say they can. Um, absolutely. A lot depends on what it means to have the kind of higher order representational state that we're talking about. And I don't think we really understand what that means. So, uh, I mean, I think animals are conscious. And if higher order theories are true, they had better account for that. Certainly would be a point against them if they couldn't. So, uh, yes. All right, so agreed. And I think that's why Dennett says it's the default view. What's the default view? Phenomenal realism is the default view. Yet this has been taken to be controversial. Huh. I'm not sure what the it is here. It is the default view, or it is taken to be controversial. Yeah. Anyway, this has been fun. I wish I could hang around more, but actually, I gotta be heading out. So the good questions, great discussion, Stephen. You're welcome to come back anytime if you ever want to come on. Send me an email. I'll schedule a time for us to have a Zoom chat or to have an open chat or whatever for you to jump onto. Um, and I know there was probably some things above that I was supposed to respond to, but I didn't get to. Wait a minute. Illusionism is the default view? Holy mackerel. What? Dennett, no, that's insane. Um, Illusionism is not the default view by any means whatsoever. It's either like non-controversial as to be banal and like that no one denies, and therefore is just a weird inflammatory label given to a view that everyone already accepts, which is just called physicalism, uh, about phenomenal consciousness. Or it's the most extreme view known to mankind, which is to claim that phenomenal consciousness doesn't exist. So that's the dance that these guys go back and forth between, which is what's so frustrating. Um, I think Francois is the closest one to sticking to his guns and actually saying what he means, which is that pains don't exist in some sense, that there is not, there is no, there is nothing that it's like for me to have a pain. Um, Whereas, Keith sounds like he's saying that, but then when you talk to him, he's kind of backtracks on that. But if you allow that there's any kind of experience at all, then you get the hard problem. That's it. That's all that you need. That's all that you need. Um, yeah, you can email me. My email's on my website. Um, so Dennett thinks illusionism should be the default view. He thinks that, but he's wrong. It's not the default view. And that makes sense if they are just denying qualia. Um, yeah, but it doesn't make sense if they're denying what its likeness or subjectivity or phenomenal consciousness. When those terms don't mean qualia, they mean something else. So illusionism, to do any work, the work that they think that it needs to do, has to deny subjectivity, gents full stop, has to deny that there's something that it's like from my point of view. So that's not the default view. No, no, no. Maybe you could say, if I mean, I don't know, you'd have to do really a lot of work to restrict illusionism to just to claim that qualia don't exist. Um, and if you did all of that work and then showed that that was the case, then you would find out that no one holds that view. And so therefore it's kind of uninteresting to find out that we should reject it, because we already do for well-known reasons. So, phenomenal consciousness, subjectivity, there being something that it's like, these are the things that Keith says he's rejecting. These are the things that Dennett says that he's rejecting. I once heard Dennett say, there might be nothing that it's like from your dogs to be a dog. It's just like, uh, and the same may be true for you as well. So, that's the thing that they have to be illusionists about. It has to seem to us that there's something that is like for us when there isn't. And that's the thing that I think is so very misguided about illusionism, is that there clearly is something that it's like for me. And their desire to say that there isn't seems to be purely motivated by a desire to preserve some version of physicalism. But if you want to be a physicalist, you should just be a physicalist and accept the existence of subjectivity. Um, well, it's only not that rhetorically interesting since, oh, hey, Richard, I saw you emailed me actually, so I was going to get back to you eventually, but good to see you popping up. Oh, you did retracted the message before I could read it. Anyway, still good to see you popping up. Um, so the confusion over the view has been over what it is they're denying. So that's the uninteresting part. If all they're denying is something everyone already denied, but they're just giving it a controversial term, illusionism, then that's not that interesting. But they say they're denying more than that. They're saying, oh, they're not just denying qualia, they're denying this other thing, phenomenal consciousness, what it's like, subjectivity. So then we go, oh, wait a minute, wait, those are things that we accept. So which is it? So if they tend to introduce the view by saying they're denying the one thing, but then when you back them into the corner, they say, no, we're just denying the other thing. So that's why it's uninteresting, because what was exciting about the view was that, at least as presented originally, was that they're saying there's no phenomenal consciousness. Dennett gave the talk at the online consciousness conference that I organized, and it was called On a Phenomenal Confusion About Consciousness. And the point of it was that there's no phenomenal consciousness. There's nothing that it's like for you. There's just the representation that there's something that it's like for you, which is, as the pessimistic idealist guy was saying earlier, then we need an account of what exactly those contents are. Um, so anyway, yes, I would say, um, if they wanted to do the work that they want it to do, then phenomenal consciousness. Yeah, but no one accepts that definition. That's not, nobody accepts that definition. So you could define it that way and then try to refute it, but you're not refuting the thing that everyone accepts, which is that there's something that it's like for me, and that doesn't involve qualia. Book's coming out in April, hopefully, as that according to the publishers. So that'll be cool. Um, so if they define phenomenal states that way, then they're just again using an inflammatory label, saying they're doing one thing but not really doing that thing. So you know, I mean, it would be great to reduce the manifest image to the scientific image, but I view Dennett as trying to eliminate the manifest image, not reduce it. It wants to say it's not really there. It only seems like it's there, but it's not really there. That's the part that is annoying to me. Um, oops, the Zoom meeting ended because there was nobody coming in. I didn't expect that to happen. Uh-oh. Can you guys still hear me, I wonder? You can still hear me. Oh, wow, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Um, well, hold on. How do I fix this? Oh, I know what to do. Um, hold your horses here. Is it this? Okay. Device. BD. Yes. Okay. So maybe you can see me now. I wonder if that worked. And oops, sorry, no, not that. Do this. Okay, so I wonder if I'm back now. We'll see in just a second. Whoa, that was weird. So I did not expect that would happen. But hey, look at me, I'm back. Um, but the Zoom meeting ended because of inactivity. I guess I did sort of know that they did that, but since I was streaming it, it shut down the stream. Okay. Anyway, I'm back. Um, Is there much difference between elimination? Yes, I would say there absolutely is difference between elimination and reduction. Reduction is saying one thing is really just the other thing. Elimination is saying the one thing doesn't exist. So I think that um, elimination and reduction couldn't be more different. Completely different. Um, so r- to reduce one thing to another is just to say. So exact. So to say that Superman is Clark Kent isn't to eliminate one of them. It's just to say there's just one guy there. So um, that's not to say that you've eliminated anything, but to say that there are no ghosts is to eliminate something. So to say there is none of the thing is to eliminate it. To say that one thing is really just the other is to reduce it. In the old days, people like Quine said that there was no difference between these two things because they were talking about something else. That's theoretical reduction, which is where you have a theory couched in one terminology, and then you map the terms in one theory onto the terms in another theory. And then you say you've reduced one theory to the other theory. And then people like Quine said, well, so you could talk using only the vocabulary of the reduced to theory and thereby eliminate the terms from the other theory. And if you have certain metaphysical views or certain interpretations about stuff, then maybe that means you got rid of those things. But I reject that kind of Quinean picture. So what I'm talking about is an ontological reduction, not a theoretical one, not reducing one theoretical term to another theoretical term, but to say that in reality, what we thought were two things is just one thing. That really all along there was just one thing there. That's what reduction is. That's what water being H2O is. That's what lightning being electricity is. Is to say not that there were two terms in a theory which we could reduce one to the other, but to say that in reality there's just the one thing, electrical discharge, which is lightning. So those are very different things, in my opinion. Okay, so what's a semantic dispute about what we mean by phenomenal properties? The metaphysical dispute is uninteresting. The semantic dispute is only interesting depending on how we interpret the hard problem. I'm not sure about that. Um, David Pitt's book is already out, so he beat me. Yeah, The Quality of Thought, excellent book, by the way. Um, I'm pretty sure it's already out. I think it is. So I'm not sure about what you're meaning by all this. I am noticing that I'm somehow still here when I said I was going. That's what happens. Um, yeah, let's see here. Hold on a second. David Pitt. Um, I had him on Consciousness Live, talking about the book when it was supposed to first be coming out. Um, yeah, his book is already out. It was in print for a long time, though. I understand that. You could get it by Thursday on Amazon right this very second. By the way, I recommend that you read that book. It's very good. Um, yeah. Oh, you just checked. Okay, good. Um, but the argument for it being semantic is that we can remove the word. Yeah, exactly. Oh, now you say you got it. Okay, good. Um, cool, guys. All right. So, hey, am I gone again? Oh, maybe because I went to go Google David's book. Did it not? I don't see myself in the video stream anymore. Um, anyway, that's weird because I see myself in OBS. Um, huh, strange. All right, guys. Anyway, I do have to get going. The kids are home. It's family Connect night. We're gonna play Connect 4 and Rabbids Party Adventure. I'm still here, really. Okay, well, I don't. That's weird. Okay, really good discussion. I appreciate it. Um, I appreciate all the feedback in the comments, Stephen. You have some interesting points, I have to admit, but still haven't convinced me that illusionism is A, interesting, or B, true. But you could work on me a bit more in the future. Everyone else, good to see you guys. Thanks for stopping by. Uh, again, if you're just joining me, I was supposed to be talking with Ned Block earlier, but yeah, unfortunately, he had to cancel, and so I'm going to try to reschedule that. We'll see. So, a question about the 2D stuff from Richard, real fast. A lot depends on what you mean by knowing something a priori. What if something is contradictory, given the physical laws? What do you think about that? Um, well, I have a lot to say about that, unfortunately, but I'm going to have to save that. So next time I'll start by maybe trying to say something about that. That's a good question. But I do have to go. I said I'd be done by 4, and it's already 4:30, so I can tell that I'm being neglectful. But thanks again, guys. I appreciate the discussion. I will come back around. I'm trying to have more of these like office hour open things. So where I can just hang out with people and talk about this stuff. So I'm going to be trying to do these more regularly. I'm trying to do one of these and one consciousness live per month. So I already had one this month with Josh Weisberg. I was technically squeezing another one with Ned. So next month I'll be talking with Peter Langland-Hassan, and then I'll do one of these again. With my teaching schedule, it's hard to do more, but that's what I'm aiming for. Anyway, I appreciate all the conversation. I love talking about this stuff. Um, and I'm not allowed to talk about this stuff at home, so this is my only chance. Anyway, guys, take care. I'll see you later.